Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Carl Jung.
I used to believe I was in control of my life, that the choices I made were mine, that the love I pursued, the pain I tolerated, the dreams I chased, all of it came from some sovereign part of me, a center of will. But over time, certain patterns kept appearing. People who mirrored the same wounds. Cycles I swore I'd escaped. Emotions that arrived like echoes from a memory I never named. The more I tried to steer my life, the more it felt like something else was moving the wheel. Something underneath. It wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was quiet. Familiar. Like an old melody I didn't remember learning. There's a kind of suffering that doesn't scream. It whispers. It shows up in who you trust, in what you avoid, in the things you keep forgiving that shouldn't be forgiven. For years, I told myself it was just bad luck, wrong timing, fate. But what if it wasn't fate at all? What if it was me? Or rather, a part of me I'd never met, writing my story from beneath the floorboards. That's when I began to see it. Not all at once, but slowly, in my reactions, in my compulsions, in the way I'd say one thing, but feel another tightening in my chest. There was something hidden, directing everything I thought was my own. I had been living a script, not written by the world, but buried deep within me. And the worst part? It didn't feel foreign. It felt like home. There was once a girl named Alara, who lived in a city made entirely of mirrors. Every building shimmered with her reflection. The windows returned her smile. The sidewalks mirrored her pace. Even the sky, when it clouded over, seemed to carry her moods back down, like a private weather. In this city, identity was never questioned, because everywhere she looked she saw herself. She walked through life convinced that what she saw was who she was. Kind, clever, composed. She wore the right expressions, spoke the right truths, played the role the mirrors expected of her. The daughter, the friend, the quiet dreamer. No one questioned it. Not even her. But at night, the mirrors changed. They didn't break. They bent. Sometimes her smile warped at the corners. Her eyes flickered with something older, something wounded. And sometimes when she stared too long, she saw not one reflection, but two, one behind the other, faint like a second skin. Watching. She told no one. How could she? In a city like this, truth had to be symmetrical. Everyone knew. The mirror never lies. But deep down she could feel it, an invisible thread tugging at her wrist, telling her that what she called me was only half the picture, that something, or someone, else was living beneath the glass. And the thread kept tightening. Each time she laughed when she wanted to cry. Each time she agreed when her stomach twisted. Each time she told herself, I'm fine. The city never noticed. But the mirrors did. They shimmered, shifted, and waited for the moment she'd stop pretending that her reflection was real. The thread first appeared in her sleep, coiled like ink on her wrist. When she awoke, it was still there, thin, black, almost weightless. She tugged at it gently. It resisted, but didn't snap. It stretched into the floor, disappearing between the cracks of her polished home. Alara tried to ignore it at first, wrapped it in cloth, tucked it under her sleeve, told herself it was nothing. But the thread didn't care about denial. It pulsed when she lied, twitched when she smiled too hard, pulled when she stayed too long in places that hurt her. One morning, she stopped pretending. She let it pull. It led her away from the familiar routes, away from the mirrored streets, and the smiling neighbors who never asked questions, down alleyways she'd never noticed, beneath staircases she didn't remember building. Deeper and deeper, the city changed. The walls no longer reflected, they absorbed. Sound grew soft, like walking inside a dream. And still, the thread guided her. She found herself in places that felt older than the city itself. Doors without handles, windows with no view, and carved into the stone around her were things she'd never admitted aloud. Old memories, forgotten names, fragments of rage. Each one etched like a secret she'd never confessed, not even to herself. Her hands began to shake, not from fear, but recognition. This wasn't a nightmare. This was memory. She realized the thread wasn't leading her away. It was leading her back, not to who she had been, but to who had been watching her live her life all along. At the end of the tunnel, the thread vanished into a door she had never seen before. A heavy slab of iron, pulsing faintly, as if it were breathing. Alara stood before it for a long time. Her hands trembled, her feet rooted to the stone floor. And yet she knew there would be no returning until she passed through. When the door opened, it didn't creak. It sighed. Inside, the air was thick with silence. The room was neither dark nor lit. Everything was dim, like memory half remembered. And in the center, seated on the floor, was a figure. She was still, but not unfamiliar. Alara stepped closer, and the figure lifted her head. She had Alara's face, but older. Not in years, in knowing. Her eyes didn't blink. Her skin looked like it had weathered every emotion Alara had buried. The jealousy she never spoke of. The rage she called sensitivity. The grief she never mourned. All of it, alive in this other version of herself. She didn't speak. She didn't need to, because Alara saw everything. In flashes. The moments she had chosen silence to keep peace. The relationships she had clung to out of fear. The tiny betrayals of self she called compromise. They flooded her, like a dream unraveling. And she realized, this shadow self had been living each of those moments. Cast out, but never gone. Alara dropped to her knees. Not out of terror, but because she finally understood. This wasn't her enemy. This was her echo. The part of her that had been pulling strings, steering choices, building a life not from desire, but from wounds. She hadn't met a monster. She had met the author of her fate. The room held no clocks, but Alara stayed a long time. She did not speak. She only watched and remembered. The other self, the shadow Alara, didn't move, but her presence was heavy, like weather pressing against the skin. She radiated everything Alara had once called weakness. The desperation, the need, the hunger for control, the fear of abandonment. For years, Alara had hidden those parts behind politeness, perfection, and performance. But now, face to face, she couldn't look away. There was no confrontation, no fight, only a choice: to reject her again, or to sit beside her. Alara stepped forward, slowly, and sank to the floor beside her shadow. She didn't try to understand it all. She didn't ask for answers. She simply let herself feel what she had spent a lifetime avoiding. Shame, resentment, longing, guilt. They came like waves. And for the first time she didn't flinch. Something shifted. The other Alara didn't disappear. She softened. Her posture changed. Her eyes, once piercing, became tired, like someone who had waited a long time to be seen. And in that moment, Alara understood. This shadow had never tried to harm her. She had only ever tried to protect her, in the only way she knew how: through repetition, through defense, through silence. But now, she no longer needed to steer from the dark. Alara had come home to herself. When she stood again, she felt no triumph. Only weight. The kind of weight that makes you stand taller, not smaller. The door behind her opened on its own. And when she stepped out, the thread was gone. Not because it had snapped, but because it had been woven back in. Alara emerged the way she had descended, through quiet corridors and forgotten stairwells. But now, the city no longer shimmered. The mirrors that once sang with her reflection stood still, dimmed, like old glass after rain. For the first time, they didn't rush to show her smiling face. They waited. She passed familiar streets, but the colors had shifted. People spoke the same words, but she heard something beneath them. Hesitation, fear, longing, denial. The things she had once overlooked now stood out in stark relief. It was not judgment. It was awareness. She stopped in front of the tallest mirror, the one that had always reflected her best angles, her practiced smile, her social ease. She looked into it, and it looked back, but not with mimicry, with depth. Her face was still her own, but her eyes held something they never had before. Silence, yes, but the kind that comes from knowing. The kind that doesn't need to perform. The mirror did not lie to her anymore. It simply showed everything. The cracks, the softness, the grief she still carried. And somehow it was beautiful. Not perfect, but whole. She began walking again. Not faster, not slower, but grounded. The thread no longer tugged at her wrist. It pulsed from within, like a rhythm she now recognized. The choices ahead still felt uncertain, but they no longer felt predetermined. She would still fall, still forget. But now she knew where to return. Not to the mirror, but to the one beneath it. The one who watched. The one who had always been there, waiting for her to wake up. Carl Jung believed that the human psyche is far more than what we consciously know about ourselves. Beneath the surface of our awareness lies the unconscious, a vast inner world where all the repressed, forgotten, denied, and feared aspects of our identity live. This includes our traumas, our instincts, our patterns, our desires, and our wounds. When these unconscious parts remain unseen, they don't disappear. They operate in silence. They influence who we love, what we fear, what we avoid, how we react. Left in the dark, these patterns direct our lives. And because we don't recognize the origin, we call it fate. That's what Jung meant when he said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." The thread in Alara's story is a symbol of these invisible patterns. Her descent into the depths is what Jung called shadow work, the difficult and painful process of facing the parts of ourselves we've disowned. But integration is not about destroying the shadow. It's about bringing it into awareness, listening, honoring, reclaiming. When Alara sat beside her shadow, she didn't conquer it. She acknowledged it. And in doing so, she transformed. That's the essence of individuation, Jung's term for the psychological journey toward wholeness. You cannot become who you truly are by chasing light alone. You must meet what's hidden. Only then can you choose consciously, not from pain, not from fear, not from old scripts, but from the center of your own being. That is not an easy path, but it is the only one that leads to freedom. Sometimes, I still feel her with me, the one who lived in the quiet corners of mirrors, the one I used to run from, the one I once blamed for all the ruin in my life. But now, when I feel her presence rise, I don't flinch. I listen, because I know she is not here to destroy me. She is me, the part one abandoned when the world told me who I should be. Since that night, I haven't been the same. I walk through familiar streets, but the world feels deeper. Every encounter, every silence, every shadow on the wall. They speak now. They speak the language I never learned as a child. The language of the unconscious. The whispers beneath behavior. The symbols beneath pain. I used to believe fate was something that happened to me. That life was written somewhere far away, by hands I could never touch. But now I see how often it was my own forgotten self, pulling the strings from behind the curtain. And yet, I don't resent her anymore. I hold her hand. Together, we choose. Not blindly, not perfectly, but consciously. That is what it means to return. Not to go back to who I was, but to carry forward all the parts one had once left behind. To walk not in fear of what lies within, but in reverence. And if there is still such a thing as fate, then let it be shaped by a soul who has looked inward and did not turn away.